told you all on Friday's show that the weekend slate was not nearly the same caliber that what it was hyped up to be in the preseason. However, what I did not say was that the slate still wouldn't deliver. This sport delivers every single weekend. That was par for the course on Saturday. So much to talk about on today's show. Welcome into the Spring Blake College Football Show. This is your favorite ball knower's favorite ball knowing show. Today is Monday, November 3rd. We've got Week 10 recap coming up. We're going to spend another Monday show talking major shakeups within the SEC. As I mentioned, recap all the biggest results we saw on a football field. We're also going to do a little bit of a look ahead today to the first college football playoff ranking that is set to be released Tuesday evening. And as always, we'll have a whole lot of fun while doing it. If you are here for the very first time, first of all, thank you for joining this show. I hope for the next 45, 50 minutes of your time you enjoy your experience here. If you are watching on YouTube, please make sure to like this video, to subscribe to this channel, to leave a comment. What was your favorite game of the weekend? Make sure to support us however you can on that social front as possible. As I've mentioned, the YouTube numbers have been getting better throughout the course of this first season of us doing this thing. So if you are someone that is going to YouTube and supporting us there, I do appreciate it. That doesn't mean I don't love the people on the Spotify, the Apple, wherever you're listening to the podcast. Make sure to support there as well. 5-star review, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend. I don't know. Whatever you can. I appreciate that support, as well as heading to social media, both Twitter and TikTok. Those accounts are at SpringBlakeCFB. TikTok's the main one. Twitter's been kind of a dud for us, so I've abandoned it a little bit. But do make sure to be following us on socials there for stuff for this show, stuff beyond this show. Really, like I say every episode, I really appreciate the support that you guys have been giving us, and it's made this a whole lot of fun to do. So let's keep that rolling. Let's do it again. Let's start a Monday show with some news on the coaching front. This time, Hugh Freeze fired at Auburn following what I believe was a 10-3 final score to Auburn. I'm going to lower this microphone because I think I've been blowing out your guys' ears through the first few minutes here. But yes, Hugh Freeze fired at Auburn following a home loss to Kentucky on Saturday. Hugh Freeze finishes his Auburn career at 15-19, which even worse in the SEC, 6-16 in the conference over 2.5 seasons. Even worse when up against ranked opponents, that being just 1-12 in his tenure there at Auburn. Hugh Freeze is now the 8th Power 4 head coach to be fired in the middle of the season, the 4th within the SEC. Now, what's interesting about Hugh Freeze and this decision to move on from him is, unlike at Florida, where you were like, things are just stale, we're not taking the next step, or at LSU, where it's like, okay, well, we're winning, but are we winning enough? Are we winning emphatically? Are we meeting expectations? Same thing for Penn State. We're loading up. This is the year to make the jump. We didn't make the jump. This move at Auburn is very different than what you got at those programs the last few weeks. Most of Hugh Freeze's issues here boil down to his inability to get the quarterback position figured out. And by part, that played into a role of the offensive failures at Auburn. Now, outside of the quarterback position, Auburn under Hugh Freeze had success in a lot of areas. The ground game at Auburn never dipped into the lower half of college football in all 3 seasons. The defense was never outside the top 50 in college football, was inside the top 30 the last 2 seasons. Hell, he even had back-to-back years of top 10 recruiting classes. So you're getting consistent defense where it's not lights out, but it's above average in college football. You're recruiting well, you're doing all right in the transfer portal, and the ground game, as I mentioned, was strong too. You had the feeling like everything was going where it needed to go. All the pieces were starting to be put in place. However, the inability to put up points, stretch the field through the air, let everything else down. These are the passing offense numbers under Hugh Freeze at Auburn the last few seasons. In 2023, 124th in the nation. Last season, 2024, it jumped up significantly to 28th, but they were still 97th in turnovers, had a ton of issues protecting the football last season. This year, 2025, passing offense is down to 121st in college football. His team was also held to 24 or fewer points in all but 5 of SC games under Hugh Freeze. Now, it's not to say that Hugh Freeze is the only guy that struggled with this. There are plenty of teams, plenty programs in college football that struggle to get the quarterback right, that miss maybe not every single year, but infrequently. But when you are someone that has an offensive background, and that was what kind of got you your first rise into the SEC a ways back, got you, your rebirth there at Liberty, you are supposed to be this offensive-minded guy. And when you are that, and you specifically go into this most recent transfer portal and you say, Jackson Arnold is my guy. He is the one that gives me the best chance to win at Auburn in 2025. When you do something like that, you better be right, and in this case, he was not. Jackson Arnold really struggled to do much of anything this season, especially when conference play opened up. He was benched at a certain point. He was reinserted into the lineup, benched again. Jackson Arnold, we talk about how there's so many players in this sport, top highly touted prospects that come out of the high school ranks and they just never make it work. Jackson Arnold is another member along that list. But there's also blame on Auburn here for not being able to get the thing right, because Auburn specifically chose him knowing that they had a good offensive line, a good ground game, a really good defense, talented wide receivers. Like this was Hugh Freeze's decision to make. He's the offensive-minded guy. He gets to choose what quarterback he comes in, and you are Auburn. This isn't like you're someone at the G6 level where you're like, man, we just got to get whoever we can, and maybe we get lucky and hit the right guy in the transfer portal. No, Auburn is a prestigious program, and that was a good opportunity for any quarterback to go in and fit. Steve Angeli, a guy that went to Syracuse, I think he would have done just fine at Auburn. I know the way that Joey Aguilar's offseason worked out, where it was UCLA and then to Tennessee, is a little bit different. Auburn would have been a nice fit for him. There were available quarterbacks in this transfer portal. Hell, John Mateer, I know he was very hamstrung to wherever Ben Arbuckle was going, but there are quarterbacks in the portal available each year that hit at their new destinations. The demise here for Hugh Freeze, the big one this season, was taking his shot on Jackson Arnold, and that marriage never materializing to do much of anything. So that's why Hugh Freeze is now out the door. His buyout actually isn't as bad as all the other coaches in the sport. I think it's around $15.8 million. Still a good number. I'd take that paycheck. But it's not to the lengths of like a Brian Kelly or a James Franklin, because he was taking that next jump from the G5 level. So Hugh Freeze is out the door. I don't really have a ton to hang on. The one thing I'll say about Hugh Freeze is that because of who he was off the field, some recruiting violations, he wasn't the most easy guy to love. A lot of people are using today to be a victory lap and say, hey, bad guy gone. Sure, not the best dude. I think he's kind of entertaining. He's a funny character. Does that mean I want him to be my head coach? Not necessarily, but interesting character for the sport. I don't want this to be like the victory lap of like, he was a bad guy at Auburn and that's why he's no longer there. Like, no, this didn't really have to do with the personality of Hugh Freeze. It just came down to success on the football field. And at the quarterback position, they were not getting that. So to move forward with this Auburn job, I think it's a little redundant because we've sat here this is the fourth Monday show in a row. At first, it was Penn State firing James Franklin. Then it was Billy Napier out at Florida. Most recently, Brian Kelly at LSU. Now here with Hugh Freeze at Auburn. A lot of the same names apply. So we're just going to briefly run through them again, just so I can say that when I talked about Hugh Freeze, these are the names we mentioned. But a lot of them that applied for Ole Miss, Penn State, LSU to some degree still apply here. James Franklin will be under consideration. He's the one guy that could go and sign a deal right now as their new head coach. He's also being linked to Virginia Tech. There's still some jobs that are going to open up between now and the end of the season, so I understand why he might want to take some time. Brent Key at Georgia Tech, Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, John Summerall at Tulane. He probably makes the most sense to me. Summerall has good recruiting ties to the state of Alabama, has been winning at Troy, now Tulane. Tulane's taken a little bit of a step back this year. They just got kind of crushed by UTSA this past weekend. But Summerall, I've said it for a month now. Like, to me, he's guaranteed to have a job in the SEC. It's just which one will it be? It'd be really interesting to see. He played his career at Kentucky. Does Kentucky move on from Mark Stoops? They probably should. There's a crazy buyout in there, but would they do it knowing that they could go get one of their former players in as opposed to having to coach against him every single year? So he makes the most sense. I do want to float on some different names. This is what we'll do differently with the Auburn job is instead of listing you why Brent Key is a good fit, Clark Lee is a good fit, Eli Drinkwitz is a good fit. Go listen to the last 3 Mondays. I explain that in depth. There are a couple names. One that I want to give more hype because I haven't talked about him since the preseason, I think. And then the second one, a name that got floated out that I'm like, whoo, let's pump the brakes. Let's talk about the good first. I keep coming back to wanting John Gruden and trying to find his spot within the SEC. I want to inject a little bit of life, a little bit of pizzazz, a little bit of fire into Auburn right now. John Gruden, it's funny because everyone's on Hugh Freeze for his checkered past, and John Gruden isn't the squeakiest, cleanest guy around, but he is a guy that to me would just do a really nice job exciting whatever fan base he comes into, but specifically this Auburn one, because the last few head coaches have just felt a little kind of lax, a little quiet, maybe a little crabby, maybe not enthusiastic, but just don't seem to really eat, breathe, sleep football like John Gruden does. And as someone that pays attention to the work Gruden has been doing since he left the coaching ranks, he is very eager to get back into the world of college football. I do believe whether it's college or the pros, he's going to be a head coach. I think stylistically and just the energy he has for football, college makes a lot of sense. He spent some time at Georgia in the training camp portion, and there's a great video out there just talking about how much he loves coaching, how much he loves the SEC, how much he would love to be a coach within the SEC. I think there are a few jobs that would fit him well personality-wise, and I think specifically for Auburn, it would just inject a lot of life and a lot of passion, where Hugh, you're kind of like, yeah, no, he did well at Liberty, he's got success in the SEC before, but he just doesn't really seem to be like, I'm going to make this my personality until the day I die. I think if you give John Gruden a job in the SEC, it will be life or death for him. And because of that, because of the success he's had throughout his career, I think it'd be a really great fit. Obviously, there are some massive red flags when it comes to plucking someone off a couch and dropping them into the SEC, especially a guy that hasn't coached at the collegiate ranks since he was a wide receivers coach at Pitt in 1991. I get it. A lot of his success has been in the pros, but personality-wise, I just think it'd be such a good flip from where they were with Hugh Freeze and get someone that just would spend every day loving this job and treating it like the job it deserves, because when Auburn's at its best, it can be one of the top programs in the nation, and hopefully this is a guy that could push it in the right direction. So I love Chucky. I think he's a great football guy. I don't know if that necessarily means that just because you love football, you're going to do well, but I think given his track record, given his desire to coach in this sport again, I think it would be a really good fit. On the flip side, I've seen a name pop up far too much in the last 24, 36 hours at this point, where I just want to put some water on the fire. Dump out water piss on the fire? Whatever it is. Is there a saying that's like that? I want to put out the fire. I have seen Jimbo Fisher's name so much in the last 36 hours where I'm getting worried for the Auburn faithful. Pete Nakos was the first one to put it out. And I believe that was Sunday night, just hours after the move was made. Multiple people have echoed it since. And I don't think you get to that point where there's that much smoke without there being a little bit fire and truth to the situation. I get that Jimbo Fisher checks off a lot of boxes. He's won a national championship. He's won at the highest levels of college football consistently. Like, he is, in the large sense, a good football coach. But what we saw from him at the tail end of his stints at Florida State, at Texas A&M, make me very confident that the sport has passed him by. And I don't think that this would be a hire that really ignites fire and passion and excitement in the Auburn fan base, especially when you go from taking a guy that had a checkered past and you're like, no, trust us, Hugh Freeze is going to be the guy. When that fails in 2.5 years, the last thing I want to do is go ahead and dip my toes into a guy that might have just had a better situation at Texas A&M and failed as miserably as he did there. So I hope that throughout the hiring process, those in charge, the decision makers at Auburn, realize that as well. But when I see Jimbo Fisher's name like 2 or 3 times with the Auburn job, and I haven't seen it with LSU or Penn State or Florida, that's where I start to get a little bit worried here. Because to me, if you're pushing his name out there and you're some of the more respected guys in the sport, that means that there are some decision makers that are very seriously considering it. And I don't think, I get that Jimbo wants to coach again. I would too, after how things kind of failed out at Texas A&M. Like, you want to prove yourself as a guy. I'd let someone else take that gamble, man. I really would. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Auburn situation. One last thing, like, we're 4 weeks in a row now of a major job opening up, and there's still Arkansas. There could still be Florida State. Like, we are heading toward the most chaotic offseason coaching carousel of all time, which, I'll be honest with you, kind of does me a favor, because I'm already thinking, like, what the fuck is this show going to be in the offseason? We're at least still going to have a lot to talk about, even when the football is all wrapped up. But yes, it was a bad weekend for Hugh Freeze and Auburn. But do you want to know who else had a really bad weekend of college football? Your boy, talking into this microphone right now. Holy hell, dude. I don't think I've ever had so many bad beats in one college football slate in my entire life. I got spanked around left and right and left again and right again. All across the football fields, across America. It was such a bad day for me. It started off early when Texas handed away a 34-10 fourth quarter lead to just win by 3. Killing the alt line of -6.5 I took that day. Also pushed the -3 that I locked in right before halftime, or before kickoff. So that game, absolute dud. Something that 45 minutes in, I was like, hey, we started the day off with a winner. At that same very moment, Clemson gave up its 6th touchdown of the day to Duke with 40 seconds to go, losing by 1 and crushing the -4 play that we gave out. Clemson was one of my best bets of the week. The defense was non-existent. The offense did all it could. We lose by 1. So within 30 seconds, Texans and Clemson royally fuck me. But I still marched on to the early mid-afternoon slate, hopeful as ever, until I got stuffed in a locker again. Cal did me so dirty when UVA found a pick 6 with 34 seconds left, ruined the Bears +6, one of the best bets we gave out. At that same moment, or shortly after, Gunnar Stockton knelt down at the 1 with 2 minutes to go and just sent me into a downward spiral, because we had Georgia, Florida, over 50.5. It was right there. Crosses that goal line, one winner. We start to build back a little momentum. Nope, absolutely dead. Loser, 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 loser. Oh, and wait, we're not done yet, because for good measure, I had to get fucked one more time on the day. USC just, couldn't separate despite playing against a backup quarterback, a team that USC just matches up way better talent-wise than Nebraska. They end up winning that game by 4 points, but wait a minute, your boy had -4.5. Now, people might be on me for that one. They might say, well, why didn't you buy the half point? In Tennessee, I don't know if this is the same thing in every other state where gambling is legalized, but in Tennessee, they only give you, you can only buy by points. And so if it's 4.5, I can only buy to 3.5. I can only buy to 2.5. I can't get to 4. I can't get to 3. And when you buy that full point, it was like you could take USC -3.5 at like 162. Utter ridiculousness. So we lose. Let me just run that through. Texas -3 ends up being a push when they were up 24 in the fourth quarter. Clemson just couldn't get a stop all day defensively. They ruined our Tigers -4 bet on a last-second touchdown from Duke. Cal, the most ridiculous pick 6 by UVA. UVA, honestly, I should be more mad at the Cavaliers, because that's a pick 6 where you just kneel it down. You intercept the ball, kneel, game's over. They decide to run it back in. Cal screws me there. Gunnar Stockton kneels at the 1 to ruin the over 50.5. And of course, couldn't buy a half point in USC, so we lose by a half point. Haven't had a day like that in a while. Haven't had a day like that maybe ever. It was very frustrating. Now, thankfully, we hit a few winners. We hit a nice thing on Sunday. It wasn't the worst weekend ever, but it was a Saturday from hell at the Spring Blake Studios here in Nashville, Tennessee. So, bad day for Hugh Freeze, bad day for Blake. Let's take a little bit of a break. We do have to talk some of those games that we just mentioned. We got to do some game recaps, college football playoff stuff. I need some water, so we'll be back in a second.
Balake. Where is Balake at?
All right, so let's backtrack a little bit, go over some of those games there that I just mentioned. Texas, despite fucking me, did hold on to beat Vandy at home this Saturday. The final score, 34-31. Story of the game is Arch Manning having the best day of his season, of his career. I know that's basically the same thing, so that's redundant to say, but either way, Arch looked really good. Finished 25-33, 328 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air. Accurate, sharp, the arm had some zip on it. Really, the game where you were like, see, this is what we wanted you to be. This is what we expected in week 1. And it's almost like, some players need some time to, develop, or some game reps to start to see the field better. And when you see the field better, maybe you trust your arm a little bit more, or maybe even get, further removed from an injury that a lot of people had been speculating that you had. So it's almost like, maybe who you are in week 1 isn't who you are in week 10. Now, it also does help when your playmakers make plays. Ryan Wingo with a nice 75-yard score on the first play. That helps set the tone for Texas and really put Vandy in a very disadvantageous spot. God, I don't think that's a word. Maybe it is. Emmett Mosley, 7 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Even Contrivion Wisner, he didn't have the best day, the most electric day on the ground, but he turned out some yards, 100 all-purpose yards on the day with 1 score as well. Because of all that, they were effective on third down. They gave up 0 sacks on the day, punted just once. And then how about this one on the other side of the ball? This was the key to the game that I gave you guys last weekend when previewing Vandy at Texas. It ended up being the biggest difference maker in the game. Vandy's offense heading into this week had been living and dying by the explosive ground game, led the country in 20-yard runs, had like 5 or 6 of 30, 40 plus. Like they were just churning out 4 yards, 4 yards, 60, 4 yards, 4 yards, 40. The explosive ground game was keeping them afloat on offense, but the Texas defense had given up 1 run like that all season, or maybe it was 2. Vandy was held to 58 rushing yards on the day. 25 of those came on 1 run from Diego Pavia, so subtract that. That's 33 rushing yards on the day. I think I did that right. Yeah, 23 rushing yards, 33 rushing yards on the day outside of that Diego Pavia run. Utter dominance from the Texas front 7. Obviously, like the fourth quarter collapse happened. It was a thing. It was concerning, but it was kind of like in the sense of, do you remember a few weeks ago when Miami played Florida State and Miami jumped out to like a 29-10 lead, and then Florida State just, the game's all over, so let's just sneak in a few points. Let's make this not look that bad anymore. That's what this kind of was here. This game was over after the first 3 quarters. Yes, it is bad on the coaches and the players to let it get to what it was, and this got a little bit further than Florida State's comeback to Miami did because it was an offensive, what's that play called? Holy shit, an onside kick recovery away from being like, oh my God. And Vandy probably should have recovered that onside kick. Like it got a little bit more tense than Florida State Miami did. But I'm not sitting here being like, see, that's why Texas is still bad. That's why you can't trust them. Like, yeah, Texas was a flawed football team coming into this, just like all but maybe 2-3 teams in the sport right now. Like I didn't, because they were so dominant in 45 minutes in the first 3 quarters, I wasn't like Texas. They're right back to being national title contenders. They can do no wrong. Yeah, they're still a flawed football team, and allowing that to happen might play into some of those flaws there. That being said, they still pick up the win. They keep moving through their schedule with very few hiccups, and all their goals are still right in front of them. That's the thing with Texas. If this is the version of Arch that Texas is going to get the rest of the way, and the version of the Texas offense, if this is the version of the Texas offense that we will get because of Arch, the playmakers will look better, the O-line will play better, the ground game will be more effective, they're going to make some really interesting conversations surrounding the college football playoffs by the end of the regular season. This isn't a new take. We've been saying this for weeks. 3-loss SEC teams in college football are going to get more benefit of the doubt this year than they did last year. And that's just one brain thinking that and believing it to be true. But I think the way that SMU got, handled in the first round there, and a way that a few of those opening round games went, I think there's going to be more preferential treatment to a 3-loss Texas or a 3-loss Oklahoma than it was last year to 3-loss Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss. The way that played out, I think people want to say like, oh no, this is the way it's going to be. You can't get 3 losses. It's very fluid to me on a year-by-year basis and how those 3-loss teams look. And then for Texas specifically, if they can get through the rest of the regular season and they get to those 3 losses, yeah. The Florida one is bad. You can't ignore it. It's a tough game, road environment. You can't really spin that one in a positive light. But the other 2 losses, week 1 to Ohio State, you lose by, I think, 7 points. Ohio State has looked nothing, but the best team in college football from that moment on. And then if they can get to 3 losses, that means they beat one of Georgia or Texas A&M, and that means they lost to one of Georgia or Texas A&M. One of those 2 teams, in my opinion, will be playing for an SEC title, maybe both of them. But at the very least, those 2 teams should be locks for the playoffs. And Texas at that point wins over Oklahoma, wins over one of Georgia or A&M, a good win over Vandy. It's a compelling case. It's a really compelling case. If that Florida game was a blowout, I'd feel differently. It was like, 29-22. They came back late. I'm just saying, man, it's going to make for some really interesting conversations because the Texas team has always been talented. They've just had their couple of fatal flaws that have hurt them up to this point. If what we saw from Texas against Vandy is what Texas is going to be, and they knock off one of Georgia or A&M, it's going to be hard to keep them out of the playoffs if they're a 3-loss team when it's all said and done. And then, to flip over to Vandy for a little bit, like you found yourself in a situation where you had to deviate from your game plan, your season-long game plan every week. It's like, we want to just win by grinding out these wins. We're going to, maybe have some high-scoring games against bad defenses, but when we face up against those, we'll just grind out 17-10 wins. The game plan slipped, and you weren't able to play your brand of football. Just 9 carries between Cedric Alexander, McKillen Young. So, that's not how you want to live as a football team. You want those guys to be getting closer to the 18-20 combined carries in a game. 9, you just had to totally deviate from who you are as a football team. All that said, I was kind of impressed with Diego Pavia's game through the air. He hasn't traveled well and played on the road well this season. He played really well on Saturday. Now, a lot of that was in that section of the game where I was like, yeah, it's all but wrapped up. So, have a few cute drives there, Pavia. Oh shit, wait a minute, this is actually close now. That was kind of how it played out to me. Still though, to go into Texas, put up those numbers, the box score looks nice. And it was, I guess I learned a little bit from them because I didn't think he had that type of performance in his bag when the ground game wasn't doing too well. All that said, I've never been an anti-Vandy guy this season, but I never looked at this story as like certified playoff football team. As the season goes on, there's going to be a lot of situations like this across college football where you're like, okay, this corrected itself. This eventually corrected itself. I think we'll be sitting here at the end of the regular season, still very impressed with the results on the football field from Vandy, but a very strong understanding that it was more of a great story than it was something that was actually tangible. I think it's a really talented football team. The rest of their schedule, I know they still have a game against Tennessee at the end of the year on the road, which will be a fun game. Forget who else they have in the meantime there, but to me, I just slowly start to see this thing slip up 3-4 losses and us being like, hey, really tough team to play, but when it's all said and done, just they're a tier below what the legit contenders in this conference were. So that is my takeaways on that game. What else do we got to do today? Do I want to take another water break? You know what? This is going to be a long one, so we're going to take another water break, and we got to talk some more SEC football.
My name's Blake.
I always fess up when I get games wrong, and I definitely didn't see this one coming in Knoxville. Oklahoma takes down the Vols. Final score is 33-27. I think I jumped off my Sooner bandwagon just a week too early, man. Now, all that said, we'll go back to that in a second. There is so much in this game that doesn't make sense when you go back and leaf through the box score. Tennessee dominated this game everywhere except for the final score. Total yardage, Tennessee had that 456 to 351. Passing yards, Tennessee 393, Oklahoma 159. Total plays run, Tennessee had an 80 to 64 advantage, which meant first down advantage 28 to 19. Third down percentage, Tennessee 54, Oklahoma 40. Penalties, just 3 for Tennessee, 11 for Oklahoma, and somehow we are sitting here, Tennessee the loser, Oklahoma the victor. Despite all those numbers, the one that makes the least sense to me is what we saw on the ground from both of these teams. Oklahoma outruns a Josh Heupel-led offense 192 to 63. Oklahoma's ground game started to get going a few weeks ago, but I thought it was more situational than anything. I thought they did it to a bad South Carolina defense that a lot of teams could run the football on. Against Ole Miss, I was like, yeah, there was a 65-yard touchdown run. That's about half their yardage on that game. I didn't really think that it was going to travel for a third time in a row. But Xavier Robinson showed me again that he's ready to be the lead dude for this offense. That he is someone that can tote the rock 15 plus times and just provide such a different outlook for this Oklahoma offense. In the last 3 weeks, Robinson has 282 yards and 4 scores, including 200-yard games in a row. He had 16 carries through the first 5 weeks. He has 36 in the last 3. I don't know if this was for certain, but I think there were a couple of lingering injuries at different points through the early parts of the season. All of that seems to be in the rearview mirror because he has totally flipped the script for this Oklahoma offense. That being said, I'm going to say it again. Allow me to say that I'd like to see him do it against Alabama and against Missouri these next few weeks for me to feel concrete about it. I just let me see it against Bama, Mizzou, and I'd be like, all right, they've found their balance. But what he has done these last few weeks has changed everything for Oklahoma. It makes the Sooner offense so much less predictable, which has allowed, the receivers Santega, Burks to be more effective through the air. And when you're more effective through the air and you can run the football, John Mateer can also be a little bit more creative with his legs when you have to. They just make themselves so much more dynamic just by having a guy that they can hand the ball off to 15 times a game. And when you can provide that juice on offense, the defense can still be successful without having to be dominant and Superman on each given week. Oklahoma's defense had 4 sacks, 3 turnovers, one of which was a massive scoop and score early in that one. And now Oklahoma, much like Texas, is just lingering, right? They're just hanging around this playoff convo. Have a chance to have a really nice resume when it's all said and done, because the rest of the way it's Alabama, it's Missouri, and then LSU. If Oklahoma can get to a point where they're a 9-3 football team, which means that means they lose to Alabama, but they beat Missouri, they beat LSU, they beat Tennessee. Their losses are to who? Texas in Mateer's first game back from hand surgery, Ole Miss, who's going to be a lock for the playoffs at that point, and then maybe it's a close one to Alabama, who's also a lock at that point. I'm not saying they're in. I'm just saying there's going to be some really interesting conversations. Texas, Oklahoma, there's a few others in some other conferences. I know it's the first week of November. We still have a month of games. This is all going to play itself out. That's what I remind myself after last year when it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do about these 20 teams that deserve to make the playoffs? It all works out. All that to say, Oklahoma, Texas, 2 teams that are very much still in the thick of things and could really stack together some impressive resumes. Like Oklahoma, I want this to be said. I jumped off them this past week. I picked Tennessee. I'm sorry. In the preseason, you guys were my 11th seed in the college football playoffs. I redid it in the middle of the season. You're my 11th seed in the college football playoffs. John Mateer was my Heisman. I took the win total over. I was in on Oklahoma. I gave up last week off the Ole Miss result. Allow me back on. I'll ride or die. I'll go down with the ship. I will not abandon you again. Awesome win. Awesome win in a really tough environment too. To flip things over to Tennessee for the Vols, I think what you're getting out of this team in November toward the end of the season is a team that is trying to win a marathon, but running like it's a 100-meter dash. This was a team that had several deficiencies, issues heading into the season. A lot of changes on the offensive front, offensive line, running backs. You have the crazy quarterback situation where you have to bring in a new guy after the spring. That obviously doesn't mean that you're going to be hitting things off 100% to start the season. You also have some really significant injuries on defense. Like Tennessee was just handed a lot of tough cards to start the year. But all that considered, they were still outperforming expectations because they just sprinted to the finish line. They had 6 games of 40 or more points. But because of that, they also had 5 games allowing 30 or more. And the 6th was Oklahoma doing so this past weekend, getting to 33. So, yes, they were putting up a ton of points, and that was what was leading them to all those wins. But they were also allowing a lot of points in that process. And now we're sitting here in November. This team's a little bit tired. They're a little bit tired from the way they've been playing. It's tough to do that for 4 straight months. It's tough to go September, October, into November. I guess that's 3 months if you could count. To get to November and to still be trying to win every game 56-34, it's a tough thing to do. You know, and you started to see that play out against what is a really physical Oklahoma football team. They just had 63 rushing yards on the day, one of the lower outputs you'll ever see from a Josh Heupel offense. The defense struggled to keep pace with what was an aggressive Oklahoma attack. And when those things happen, there's a little bit more pressure put on Joey Aguilar's shoulders than you probably would like. Because, yes, he's been very good this year under the circumstances he has been dealt. Coming to a new team that late in the season, jumping up from the G5 level to the SEC, like, again, just like Tennessee early in this year, they were outperforming expectations. But when you need him to do a little bit more, when the situations get a little bit more tense or dark, some deficiencies pop up. He had 2 interception games against Oklahoma, Georgia, and Mississippi State. Had that really bad pick 6 against Alabama. And this is the same guy that had 5 games with 2 or more interceptions last year at App State. I still think it's incredibly impressive what Tennessee has been able to accomplish this year with the cards they've been dealt. I'm sure it's just angry fans, but there was like a little bit of Josh Heupel chatter. I find that to be ridiculous. I think there are a few coaches in this sport that I'd rather have running my program than Josh Heupel. Is this team have some limitations because of him there? Sure. But there is no shot that this team got to 8 or 9 wins this season without him there. And in those other down years for Tennessee, they are still 2 or 3 wins above where they would be if Heupel wasn't running things for Tennessee. So yes, you're not going to be this playoff team. You already hit your 3rd loss. Like, this is slowly starting to fall apart now, and this is kind of falling back into what the expectations were. I thought Tennessee at the beginning of the season was an 8-4 football team. They're going to be right around that. If they get to 9, they run the rest of the way. They get through New Mexico State, Florida, and Vandy. Like, hey, you exceeded expectations. And in a year, again, where all of those things were hit at you at the beginning of the season, I think that's impressive as all hell. But I would just sit here at the end of the day, like, even if you lose one more and it's an 8-4 type season, I would just sit there and be happy that things didn't implode. Because when you are a team like Florida, where you have these expectations to make that jump, or you're expected to win a bunch, and things implode in the way they do, you're going to get injuries, you're going to get transfers, a coach fire. Like, that is not something you want to have happen. And so be happy that things didn't implode. Be happy that you're going to get to 8-4. And use this as stuff that will fuel you for next season, because this is still going to be a really talented football team next year, the year beyond. And I think there are some things you can take away from a season like this and apply it to really fuel your fire moving forward. So that's my thoughts on Tennessee. Again, I think it's just angry fans are always going to complain about the coach, but Josh Heupel is like the dude. He is such a good coach. And you're always going to have a good offense with him. You're always going to have a good ground game. They've had to just sprint this year. They know what team they have. They know that they have to win by putting up 40-plus points every game. And when you do that, and your defense is on the field a whole lot more because you're just, trying to go, by November they're going to be tired. And then when you go up against a physical football team like Oklahoma, they're going to smack you in the face and put you in an uncomfortable position. That's what happened. You lose to a good football team, but the sky is not falling in Knoxville. You know where the sky might be falling? That's a great transition. That's not a written in transition, boys. That's not. The sky is falling in Miami, man. The Hurricanes blow it again, this time at SMU. The final score is 26-20. Took us overtime to get there. I'll just say it briefly because we're not a show here that's ever going to delve into the happenings or the stats or the magic that is SMU. But I will say I was really impressed with Kevin Jennings in this game. 365 yards through the air, 2 total scores, dealt with an injury at one point, returned to keep his team afloat. I've been pretty meh on SMU this year, and that's just because I'm meh on the ACC, and I felt they were like a tier 2 team in the conference. But good for them to pick up a strong win at home against a really talented team. It's a good notch on the belt, especially coming just, hours after your head coach signs a contract extension. Like, the vibes in SMU right now are really good. And so it's a great win. They still are in the mix with the SEC in the ACC. The rest of their schedule is Boston College, Louisville, and Cal. Those last two make you a little tense just because those are frisky teams. Louisville's actually a really good team. They're not just frisky. Maybe just Cal's the frisky one. But SMU... that's a necessary win to keep yourself in conference title contention, and they did so. So hats off to them. But the story here is all about Miami. Make no mistake. Another team that just seems to be hobbling to the finish line for the second season in a row now. This team, how high were people on Miami last year, 10 weeks in? Now, it felt a little bit different this time around because the way they were winning felt more convincing. Last year, it was all just like, hey, Cam Ward got this team to 45 points and they won again. So let's just keep them in the Heisman talk, keep them in the playoff talk, and let's just keep this thing rolling. They flame out at the end. And despite having a much better team this year, they're falling down a very similar trend. Because this team was ranked second in the country less than 1 month ago. And now their playoff hopes are vanishing in the air. I've been trying to do a lot of like college football playoff look ahead stuff. A lot of people don't like their chances because we'll talk about the ACC in a second, but with 2 conference losses, there's not really a good path for them to make the conference title game. And when you do that in a conference that isn't that strong and your 2 losses are to unranked teams, at the moment, I think they were unranked. I don't think Louisville was ranked at the time. Things start to get a little messy. Here's a stat for you. Mario Cristobal, now 4-11 in November and December games as the head coach of Miami. Just complete, utter failure, keep falling apart in many different ways. For Miami this year, I don't care how physically imposing you might be. You still need to play clean football to win games in this sport. They had 12 penalties for 96 yards in this game against SMU on Saturday. Canes have the 3rd most penalties per game in college football this year. Turnovers killed them as well. 2 picks on the day from Carson Beck, including a really bad miss trying to make a throw at the end zone that ended up sealing the game in overtime. You can't forget that Beck also had his 4-interception game against Louisville just a couple weeks prior. Miami's 9 interceptions this season rank 108th in college football. One of the worst marks there. And what's worse about this game against SMU is that this should have been a game that Miami just dominated through the air because their passing game had looked great at certain points throughout the year. I know it isn't right now, but early on in the season, some of the new wideouts, like you were like, Carson Beck looks on, he looks dialed, like this thing is humming. That should have been what showed up on Saturday because SMU is giving up the 2nd most passing yards per game in college football. They're also allowing the 3rd most plays of 20-plus yards. Miami just found 2 plays of 20-plus yards through the air that game. Beck was ineffective for the most part. This team had so much potential when you look up and down the roster. And when I talked about Miami, it was like they're just so physically imposing. Like it's going to be tough for teams to match up on a week in, week out basis. But if you can't just handle the easier things in this sport, the penalties, the turnovers, if you can't play clean football, it doesn't matter how strong you are. Some teams will outsmart you. Some teams will keep things close. And that's what they did here because they've now lost to 2 teams that are not more talented than them. SMU and Louisville did not have as much talent as Miami. They played cleaner football, and that's why they are still continuing on their race for an ACC title, and Miami is sitting here in a real desperate spot. One thing about this game in Miami as we kind of shift away from game recaps, this game kind of sealed, and it wasn't just this game, but it sealed my thoughts I've seen enough at this point. Give me a one bid ACC for the college football playoffs this year. The juice at the top of this conference just isn't it. The bottom is as bottom as college football bottoms go. Each week, one of the supposed big dogs, one of the frisky contenders in the ACC gets plucked by a team that's playing below 500 football. We just talked about Miami losing to SMU. Georgia Tech obviously blew it to NC State this past weekend. I think it was like 48-35. The defense couldn't do anything. Haynes King tried to do everything. Georgia Tech loses its first game of the season. Right now in the ACC, you've got 6 teams playing above 500 in the conference. Virginia, who's undefeated, even though they lost a non-conference game to NC State. Make it make sense. I don't get it. But Virginia's undefeated in conference play. Georgia Tech, Pitt, Louisville, SMU, and Duke are the only other ones above 500. None of those teams that I mentioned are of top 20, top 25 caliber on a pure power ratings metrics. I know the resume rankings, you'll have teams in the top 25. Virginia's ranked, Georgia Tech's ranked, Louisville's ranked. I'm not sure about the others. But let's just do the right thing here and now, November 3rd, and say that we're not going to try and force a second team from this conference into the college football playoffs. Like, the only excuse I would be willing to make at this point is Miami, just because of how talented I think their roster is, but they haven't earned it. They don't deserve it. And some of these teams might deserve it, but it's going to be the same thing of when you got SMU into the playoffs last year and Penn State just kind of walked right by them. Like, I understand you got to get the conference champ in there. I hope it's Georgia Tech. I hope it's Louisville. Like, one of those two teams, to me, I can at least be like, okay, I think they're talented enough to go into the playoffs, but I'm done with the idea of, like, we need to get the ACC runner-up in here. It'll be really interesting to see how the regular season standings play out, because if there are some 1-2 loss teams here, like, I get the arguments, but we're just setting ourselves up for not putting the best teams in this sport into the playoffs, and that's a whole other conversation in itself. So I'm out on the ACC. I'm done with them. Give me your conference champ auto bid. I will be a little bit more lenient in the Big 12, but only under one very specific circumstance. I will allow, and I say I allow because I am the person who gets to decide, obviously, with my 25 fucking subscribers. I will allow the playoff committee to bring 2 Big 12 teams into the big dance, as long as that meant that Texas Tech didn't win the conference title. So what that means, I guess I'm saying there, is that if Texas Tech wins the Big 12, they should be the only team that gets in. The only circumstance I'm fine getting a second team from that conference in is if Texas Tech falls to a BYU or a Utah when it's all said and done. Now, thankfully, we'll get to see how BYU looks against the Red Raiders this weekend, but take a look at FanDuel right now. That's a 10.5 point spread. To me, indicative enough of a number to where this thing might end up going. And I'd suspect us to finally come back down to earth as it pertains to our feelings surrounding the Cougars. Now, if you pay attention to this show, I get the Cougars wrong. I'm wrong on BYU, not just this season, but last season. I can never get them right. I'll be making a final stand here with Texas Tech. I'll be doing it. Do I feel good about it? Not at all. Is BYU probably, plus 10.5 lock of the year because I said that? Sure. But when it's all said and done, I still think Texas Tech is the only team that I find playoff worthy from this conference as it pertains to purely talent. But like I said, if BYU, Utah can go in and find their way to a conference title, I'm fine putting a second Big 12 team into the college football playoffs as long as that team is a Texas Tech football program. So that's my thoughts on the Big 12. I will say one conference that it feels dumb having these conversations in November. The results will play out. But there are a few teams right now in the Big 10 where I'm like, this could get really interesting if you run the table. For starters, USC, they picked up a gross, gritty win at Nebraska. Didn't allow me to cover by 0.5 point. Thanks. Their schedule, though, is still a little bit tough. They need to get through Iowa and Oregon, but they're still hanging around in the playoff picture if that happens, if they're able to run the table. Speaking of Iowa, the Hawkeyes looked really good as of late. The one team to play Indiana close outside of Oregon. And Iowa gets to host Oregon this weekend, and they're only 7.5-point underdogs to the Ducks. They obviously can't afford a loss. Losing that third game would mean they're probably out of the college football playoffs. So a win here is pivotal. And even then, as I mentioned, they have a road trip to Southern Cal the following weekend in what would be a really tough turnaround spot for them. So USC, Iowa, they're kind of just lingering around. They need a lot to go right for them. But then the same thing could be happening for Washington. Washington is still very much in the thick of things. They've got a little bit lighter of a path than Iowa and USC. They've got Wisconsin, Purdue, and UCLA on the schedule, which would then make for a really captivating regular season finale with Oregon at home. It's not the Apple Cup. That's Washington and Washington State, or Oregon and Oregon State. It's some rivalry game, whatever it is. But we could be set up for a really interesting game if Oregon is undefeated at that point, or maybe they don't slip up, not undefeated, but they don't lose in their first, weeks before that. And then you've got Washington, who needs the win to get into the playoffs at like a 10-2. Really captivating thing. Which means that means that there are 3 teams in this conference right now, that being USC, Iowa, and Washington, that are all praying for Oregon to slip up at some point this season between now and the end of November, which makes me really interested to see how Dan Lanning gets his team to respond under those circumstances, because those are 3 games for Oregon right there. They play Iowa, they play USC, and Washington. And all 3 of those teams are going to give them their best punch, because their best punch could be the only difference between making the playoffs and missing the playoffs. And that's going to make for some really entertaining football surrounding the Oregon football program. I cannot wait to see how they respond. What do we got next? Is there anything with the SEC? We just talked Big Ten, ACC, Big 12. Georgia did Georgia things. They win close to Florida. They pull out a nice gritty win there. That's just what Georgia does all year. Ole Miss took care of South Carolina. Ole Miss just seems, like I said, with the way the schedule plays out, I know they got the Citadel and they got Florida. One other game, Mississippi State. They seem in a pretty good spot to make the college football playoffs. They'd have to do something abysmal between now and then for that to change. But there wasn't really anything else in the SEC that I thought warranted talking about. Which means we're just going to finish the show up talking playoffs. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the playoff committee is set to release its initial rankings on Tuesday night. And the committee rankings deserve a lot of attention from the day they get released. So we're going to make sure that we spend time each week talking about what the committee is seeing right now, what that can mean for what they're seeing down the road, and what that means about certain teams, playoff implications, conference favoritism, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to finish our Monday shows by projecting what I think the committee is going to release Tuesday night. And then on Wednesday's show, we will discuss the discrepancies, what I got right, what I got wrong, and then other major storylines surrounding it. Keep in mind when I say that this is not like my playoff projections or what I think is going to happen. I gave them out in the preseason. You can go listen there. I refined some things in the middle point of the season, at the mid-season. You can go take a look there. These are just what I think the playoff committee is going to release. So that way we can see, okay, does Blake know ball? Does Blake know the playoff committee or not? So this is what I think they're going to put out. I think this is what the initial playoff rankings is going to look like. If I've got the time, I'm going to do a graphic so you can see it right there. And that's like, hey, this is what I think the committee is going to do. I think the top 4 seeds are going to be in order: Ohio State, Texas A&M, Indiana, and Alabama at 4. I believe they will go to at-large teams from the SEC after that. I think they'll put Georgia at 5 and Ole Miss at 6 because of the head-to-head between the two of them. I do think, despite me not believing in them, that their undefeated record will place BYU in the college football playoffs tomorrow night, Tuesday night, when the first rankings get listed. So I say that they're going to put BYU at 7. I think undefeated, good win over Utah. Like, they've done enough to warrant being inside the top 10. So I think they'll go there. I think that Oregon, they'll have at number 8, the one loss being to Indiana. They have had a few games where they haven't looked super impressive. They've had a couple injuries, so maybe they're a little bit lower than people would expect, but I think that they're right in that 8, 9, 10 range. I think they will put Texas Tech at number 9. That is more just a one-loss team. That one loss is with the backup quarterback. They lost at the buzzer to Arizona State. Other than that, have looked like a really talented, good football team. I think they're going to put Notre Dame in. I think they're going to put them at 10. They do not have Miami in. That is something that I think is going to be a really interesting conversation come Wednesday morning when we put out next episode. Miami has 2 losses. Notre Dame has 2 losses. Miami has beaten Notre Dame. I understand that was in week 1. That was what those teams looked like then. What these teams are right now, I think Notre Dame is significantly better than what Miami is. So that is one where I'm really curious to see what the committee does, because if Miami is still in there and Notre Dame is not, that to me is a disservice to who is playing better football right now. And that should matter when we're talking about teams in the college football playoffs. So I've got Notre Dame at number 10. They obviously have to put an ACC team in, so I'll give them Virginia at 11. I think they'll just play it out that they're the undefeated team in the conference right now. They're not going to be up at 5 or 6 or 7, but in at 11, they're there. And then at 12, I think they'll go Memphis. I don't know who else they'd go. I'd go JMU because go Dukes, but I don't think they're going to do that. So that's, to me, the top 12. The first 4 out, I think, is also going to be probably even more interesting of a conversation. What I think they'll do for the first 4 out is going to be Texas, Oklahoma, Louisville, and Georgia Tech. So that is what I think they'll do. If you're listening to this beyond Tuesday night, hey, you know what happened. How'd I do? We'll come back on Wednesday to talk it out, talk to some discrepancies, what we think of the playoff committee's decisions. We'll also preview games of the week. Massive slate coming up. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I know Texas A&M has a tight game at Missouri. Oregon is traveling to face Iowa. There are some good games. We've got Alabama, LSU. LSU going to throw the kitchen sink at the Crimson Tide in the first game without Brian Kelly. We'll get into all the game previews. We'll pull out the latest Spring Blake Sweet 16 poll. We'll get to best bets later on in the week. And we'll have a lot of fun, man, because it's only getting more interesting here in the college football season. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you're on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment, interact however you can. Audio platform, Spotify, Apple, subscribe, 5-star review. Socials at Spring Blake CFB. I love you. I appreciate you, and I'll talk to you in a few days. Peace.